All right, folks, I am so excited for today's show with our featured guest, Dr. Surabhi Kalita. She's a renowned anesthesiologist and a consultant for interventional pain medicine from world-renowned institutions with a background that serves a lot of people. And she's based in Guwahati, Assam. And what is most exciting about having her on this video podcast is that besides being a medical professional, she's also a fitness enthusiast who has undergone self-transformation and committed to creating awareness amongst people regarding preventive healthcare and thereby helping people combat infection, inflammation, and pain, and thereby living a healthy, fruitful, and vibrant life. And I want to welcome Dr. Surabhi to the video podcast. How are you, Dr. Surabhi?
Hello, thank you for having me here. I'm fine.
That's great. You know, Dr. Surabhi, there's a lot going on in the world and especially in India with this pandemic. So I think it is very apt for me to ask you the first question, which is affecting probably a lot of people in this, what they deem as a second wave in India. So what is the cause in your mind of young population getting affected in the second wave?
Well, if you see, in the first wave, India confounded the whole world. People predicted that being a third world, it will be the worst hit, but it didn't happen that way. And many theories came up like we Indians being in third world are exposed to natural pathogens, more frequently, and we have a better immunity, better T cell immunity rather, or maybe we are exposed to other varieties of coronaviruses. But the sad part is India is now badly hit by the second wave. And what we classically see in a second wave is happening in India. That is, the age demography has shifted to the younger population, the more productive population of the country, which is very sad. The young population, like, 25 to 45 years, they are badly affected, and even mortality is high in this group, as we are seeing. So I think if you look at deeply into the cause, what I feel is, number one, we failed to vaccinate our population, unlike the US, because just 1 to 2% of the population has been vaccinated till now, and that too the elderly above 45. Secondly, this population, we apparently think they are healthy, but they are not healthy, because we see that in the last wave, we thought that the high risk group were the older people who had so many diseases like diabetes, hypertension, chronic kidney diseases, and asthma, COPD, and those were the people who were affected. But that was actually the tip of an iceberg, and the entire iceberg was hiding behind these, young people who apparently were healthy but suffering from chronic disease condition, the dreadful disease condition, which I would say is metabolic syndrome. Because of the cause that Indian, especially urban young Indians, have shifted to westernized diets, processed food, unhealthy, sedentary lifestyle. Plus, they have a lot of stress because the country is overpopulated. So there is competition and stress in every front. So, in such a condition, if this country is hit by a thing called COVID, where already the population has insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, pre-diabetes, diabetes, the immunity is very less. There is stress, there is inflammation, and in such a condition hit by COVID, they tend to fall prey to lower immunity and eventually cytokine storm, which is deadly and is killing. So that is basically, I think, the main cause, what is happening now. And what I feel is the government, instead of giving importance to things like remdesivir and hydroxychloroquine, had enough time in the last 1 year to prepare for the preventive health, to give importance in the preventive health, because we had 1.5 years to create awareness in this part. So that is what I believe.
Yeah, no, that's a good segue into the conversation. In preparation for me asking you these questions and learning more about metabolic syndrome, I started reading up about it, and it turns out 1 in 4 globally, depending on the country you live, it's a little less or a little more, is affected by metabolic syndrome. So it is a pretty, we'll get to it, it's probably a deadly pandemic as well. But let's dive into educating. I would love to learn from you. What is metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance?
Well, actually, it is not a proper syndrome. If you see, it's not a particular disease. It's a condition which has 5 conditions, clustered together. If you name the first condition, it is, you can say, abdominal obesity, which is, if you say the waist circumference, it is more than 35 inches in females and more than 40 inches in males. The second one is increased triglyceride levels of more than 140 milligram per DL. The third one is increase in blood glucose, which is more than 100 milligram of fasting blood glucose. The fourth one is increase in blood pressure of more than 140 by 85 millimeter of mercury. And the last criteria is decrease in a good cholesterol, that is HDL, which is less than 40 in case of male and less than 50 in case of female. So to call it a metabolic syndrome, a person did not have all the 5 out of these I mentioned, 3 or more. If present together in a person, we can say that this person is suffering from metabolic syndrome.
Yeah, no, I started reading about it, and your what you said there was it is a combination of things, and if you meet 3 of the 5 criteria that you mentioned, it is definitely and I also read about syndrome X. It's also called syndrome X.
Exactly.
Right, but it's a combination of those things. So talk a little bit about insulin resistance and what goes into that.
Yeah. So an integral part of metabolic syndrome is insulin resistance. And I think it is the most important component of metabolic syndrome. See, I'm not saying insulin is bad, but we have to have a correct amount of body insulin, because it is an anabolic hormone. It's for storage. It's required in emergencies, because how insulin, if we come very shortly into how we have how is insulin secreted in the body. It is basically the source of stimulation is carbohydrate. So when we take in carbohydrate, it stimulates insulin. Now, if we take in more amount of carbohydrate than our cells or our bodies require, and at more frequent intervals, that means suppose we are snacking frequently and that too on carbohydrates rich food, then there will be frequent and more spike of insulin. So if that happens continuously, say 6 to 8 times per day, there will come a condition where the cells are continuously secreting insulin. There is spike of insulin, and the amount of insulin in the blood will be so much that the cells will start resisting. The body cells will start resisting our own insulin. So that condition of hyperinsulinemia is called insulin resistance. So it is just a step prior to diabetes. In diabetes, what happens is ultimately the body gets tired of secreting insulin, and our pancreas gets burnt out and it stops secreting insulin. So there is less insulin. But prior to that, hyperinsulinemia is the factor why the pancreas gets burnt out, because we are constantly firing the pancreas to secrete more insulin.
Yeah.
So that is insulin resistance, and you can make a safe bet and name excess insulin as the cause of any deadly disease present in the globe today, right from metabolic diseases, heart diseases, cancer. You can just name any, even autoimmune diseases. The best and the safest cause you can mention is insulin. So insulin resistance is a very, very important pathology of metabolic syndrome.
So before we get to the next question, so sugar can be really good for you too much, right? I mean, I feel like sugar also has some reverse effect on insulin. Anything you want to add on that before we move to the next thing I had on my mind?
Well, actually, sugar is very sweet, and I can call it a sweet poison, because it is the worst thing that a person can consume. Actually, carbohydrate, by sugar I mean glucose. So any food which is high in carbohydrates, even if you take a complex carbohydrate food, it just steps away from being converted to glucose.
Yeah.
So ultimately, sugar, refined sugar especially, is immediately it spikes the insulin to sky high levels. So it is detrimental. It is
Yeah, so
very bad.
so we should tell people that stop eating too much sweets and anything sugar related, right? I mean, anything in
Exactly.
moderation. I felt anything in like 10% of your life, if it is, you can binge a little bit here and there, but 90% habits should
Exactly.
be
Because
towards,
we enjoy our food, but then we have to keep in mind, mindful eating. That is very important, especially in the pandemic when we know that the virus survives on sugar. So we know that this virus needs sugar to multiply, to replenish in the body. And we have to, if we are taking sugar, we are not feeding ourselves. We are feeding the virus indirectly. And that is what is happening to the people. They are, they are feeding themselves with dalgona coffee challenge and confectionaries and, baking challenges. And ultimately those people are the ones who are, worst affected by the pandemic.
yeah, no, I appreciate those thoughts. So now that we've established the impact and what goes into metabolic syndrome, I think we should talk a little bit about why is it the most dreadful pandemic at present? I know everybody's dealing with COVID, with the global pandemic, but why is this a more dreadful pandemic currently, metabolic syndrome?
Yeah, you have mentioned it very correctly, actually. The real pandemic that the world is fighting, not now, actually, for the last 1 decade or so, is insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome, because, it is the cause of so many diseases that we are fighting, right from, you say, cardiovascular diseases, stroke, heart diseases, cardiac arrest, then cancers, all sorts of cancers, then PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is very common, very rampant in female nowadays and leads to infertility, a lot of problems in women. Then comes dementia, so inflammatory diseases, autoimmune diseases, and one important condition is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is even as common as alcoholic fatty liver disease nowadays. So what happens is, the pathogens, especially the virus now that we are fighting, they are very opportunistic, and they make these individuals the prey, because in these conditions, in these disease conditions that I mentioned, which is a result ultimately from metabolic syndrome, in these disease conditions, the immunity is very less. So the susceptibility to infection is very high, inflammation is very high, and COVID-related complications, which is the most deadly one, is the cytokine storm, is very high in these individuals.
Yeah.
So actually, the hidden pandemic is, metabolic syndrome rather than COVID, which I would like to stress.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Now that we've established, what goes into metabolic syndrome, all the factors and all that, we're all about providing some solutions, right? Talking about it, there's a lot of people talking about it. We're going to provide solutions. And one of the things I notice, Dr. Surubi, is people don't care about their health unless they're forced to. That seems to be a mindset a little bit, and we want to give them more prevention. And we've heard prevention is better than cure. Prevention is cheaper than cure. And you live longer. And one of the goals we have is to get to a centurion club, get to 100 years old and living a vibrant life. So what are some, is it a lifelong disease with metabolic syndrome or reversible? How do you reverse it?
See, this is a very disheartening question, actually. I am not pessimistic, but actually, the thing is that metabolic syndrome is curable. It is not that it is not curable, but the bad news is, if you stop following the lifestyles that is needed to get rid of metabolic syndrome, it takes you even lesser time to reverse back to the metabolic syndrome. For instance, I'm telling you, blood pressure. Suppose you're following a good lifestyle, coming back down with the blood pressure without medications. And if you stop that lifestyle, going back to your hypertension stage will take you less than few weeks time. So it happens, the reversal back to the stage happens that quickly. So you have to make it a consistent lifestyle, a lifelong journey of fitness and a healthy living. So first point is that it is a reversible condition provided you are consistent with a healthy lifestyle. Now to reverse it, see, medically doctors, most of the doctors term it as an irreversible condition and say that you have to live with it lifelong. But I think they are wrong, and most of the people don't know how to treat metabolic syndrome. To understand how to treat and reverse, you have to know the causes of metabolic syndrome. What is causing it? Only then, when you stop these causes, will you be able to reverse it. So the first cause of metabolic syndrome, as I told you, is insulin. Second cause is inflammation. Third cause is stress. Now, what do we do about it? To bring down the insulin, as I told you, number one, cut down sugar. There is no alternative. You have to stop taking sugar directly in your tea, coffee, your fruit juices. Juice is a very common thing which we, it's actually sugar. 60% of the bottle you can imagine is filled with sugar, not fruits or anything. Even fruits have got sugar, fructose. So you have to cut down on sugar. You have to cut down on refined carbs and carbs as a whole. Secondly, if you want to cut down the spike of insulin, you have to cut down the amount of carbohydrate you're taking and the frequency of meal. That myth of taking frequent meal is actually not true. You should go for intermittent fasting, where you should eat in a window of 8 hours, and that too 2 meals, and where you will fit in all the calorie requirements of your day. I'm not saying you should go for a calorie deficit diet. So eating less carbohydrate and not frequently, but spacing out your food eating. Thirdly, exercise must. You have to exercise 5 days in a week. There are several papers which have come up that people during this pandemic, that people who do not exercise regularly are the ones who are going to the ICUs and suffering deaths. So regular exercise, be it HIIT, endurance training, strength training, anything, all of them have got individual benefits. So just exercise at least 5 days a week for 30 minutes per day. Next, I would say de-stress. Sleep is very, very important. You have to have 8 hours of sleep, good sleep, deep sleep. That is very important. And, do anything that entertains you. You can even meditate and, good, do anything that makes you feel good. So I would think, these 5 things are good enough to fight metabolic syndrome, but provided you make it a lifestyle.
Yeah. That's the key point there, what you said. It has to become so part of your being that maybe there's a topic for another video podcast. How do you read labels of things you buy? That's a whole other thing we should talk about, the good, the bad. What I've learned, one of the passions I've kind of developed over time, Dr. Surabhi, is that I've seen so much of devastation with health people. I had a friend of mine whose brother passed away at 46. And there's so many stories like that just gave me the passion to identify and share good information with the community and the world. And that's why, people like yourself are so valuable to coming on and sharing some actionable things you could do to adjust your lifestyle. And people think health is a magic pill. It's not. To your point,
it's not rocket
you've earned your health to this point, so you got to earn good health going forward as well. And I find people make work towards in their early 20s, 30s, 40s, and even into 50s. They make all this money and they give it back to the healthcare system in the 60s and 70s. But our goal is to really adjust people's lifestyle and learn more. But this has been incredibly valuable, Dr. Surabhi, and I appreciate you taking the time to educate our audience about metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance. The dreadful pandemic is obviously everybody's minds are top of mind is COVID, but really metabolic syndrome is what we all have to work to avoid with our lifestyle. So thank you so much for being on the show here and sharing a few minutes of your time. And we'll definitely catch up with you again soon.
Thank you for having me.